just want to say, what a great theme tune. Top Gun 2 saved the cinema. We all agree. Just to hear Danger Zone, it's great. No pressure for us. So I just want to open to say thank you very much again, Rick and Jennifer and everything, for being here. And I wanted to say to these three, I think in a world that I know in 20 years of broadcast, I've witnessed many colleagues, particularly my female friends, being cancelled. I think it's a pretty brutal and very unpleasant experience. Someone like Ricky Gervais or J.K. Rowling can, because of their power, can get away with it. But it's still brave. But these three speak their minds, and that takes a lot of guts. I really, really mean that, because I think seriously, it's such a rare thing these days what you do. I was sitting with Stephen over there about mainstream media, Stephen Kotkin, there he is, and he was just saying, why do we care about mainstream media, John? It's so, his word, insignificant. And then he said, can you just ChatGPT the ratings? Not ratings, audience figures. So we looked on ChatGPT just now, and CNN's prime time has fallen since 2020, 74%, right? It's actually now 405,000. It was 13.3 million in 2016. In contrast, these guys were like this. Fox has increased, up by 10% in 2021-22 to 2.1 million, and it's now 2.6 million. So to Stephen's point, why do we care? I say this from Bloomberg 20 years. Why do we care about mainstream media? Brad, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll do the most obnoxious thing, and I'll answer your question. But then first, I just want to ask a question. Does anyone know what the Gen Z's #1 search engine is? Nope, not YouTube, not Snapchat, not Google, not Bing, TikTok. Whoever said TikTok. And the reason that matters is that today's young people, when they go to get their information, how to, jump a car, what's happening in Israel, they go to TikTok. And I wish it weren't so, believe me, but that is what it is. And the reason that mainstream media ties into that is that perhaps the #1 genre of TikTok news content is just very expressive, loud people yelling into the camera, 60-second scripts, breaking news, and then just restating the Associated Press without credit, the New York Times without credit. Right? They're literally just summing up mainstream media and then putting it in these digestible short-form videos that they then say, get 15 million views, and that's where they get their news. So even if maybe these young people are not watching CNN, they don't watch television, they're certainly not reading, young people don't read under 30, basically non-existent, they are still downstream in an ecosystem that is heavily influenced by mainstream media. Mm-hmm. And that's why, while I think it is certainly withering, it can't really die because new media can't really exist without mainstream media. I host a YouTube show and podcast that is, somewhat successful, but on it, I regularly reference mainstream media articles and news and reporting. So they are interdependent, and even as the kind of organic base dries up and evaporates, it still plays an important role in shaping the discourse and setting the message.
Do you think it accurately reflects mainstream media, though? Because often it's not fact-based, it's not source-checked.
No, often
not. That's the problem with TikTok. It's completely, not kind of real news. It's dangerous for me.
It is, right? But it is what it is. So the option for people in this audience is then, or people like us, do you engage with it or do you just cede the territory? And I think Republicans and right-of-center people have in recent years smartly no longer ceded it.
So I appreciate the question. I just want to quickly thank Hadley for that wonderful introduction. I have, in recent years, developed a new appreciation for kind introductions because I do Gutfeld's show on a regular basis. And for those of you who know what I'm talking about, it's sort of self-explanatory. If you aren't familiar with Gutfeld on my network, the host of the show does a whole monologue at the beginning. There's 4 panelists, and you're just listening to the monologue, and then he introduces you one by one. And you have no idea what he's going to say about you until the camera is zoomed in on your face in front of 3 million people. And one recent introduction for me, and I'm just quoting now, was, quote, "If he looked any younger, he'd be sitting in Kevin Spacey's lap." Fox News contributor Guy Benson. And you just don't know what to do with that, honestly. You don't know what your face is supposed to do to that. And so I very much appreciate a kind introduction from Hadley. It's also, I think, really appropriate and fitting that we're having this conversation about the future of media here with this organization. And I think one of the things that separates Steamboat from a lot of other center-right organizations is that they have done important work of identifying and incubating really impressive young talent in this space, and I'm sitting on stage with two of them here. And if we're going to fix anything, a big part of it will include exactly the people that Steamboat has now raised in terms of their national profile for the last decade or so. So congratulations to Steamboat on that. It is vital, vital work. I agree basically with Brad's point. We can bemoan mainstream media or legacy media, whatever we want to call it. We can say that they are in many ways dying, which is true, and we can sometimes, through Schadenfreude, appreciate that because they deserve to die, actually. Some of at least their practices and how they're doing business very much richly deserve the fate that is befalling so many of them. But it is actually, I think, very important for a thriving republic and a free society to have a robust press where there are standards and professionals and reporting resources, not just locally, which is falling woefully short, but around the world, and people who just do punditry or people who just have a podcast or people who might just, be huge on TikTok, they don't have those resources or at least theoretically the layers of editorial control that I think matter a lot. The problem is the people who have had that trust placed in their hands have abused it so badly that they are in danger of crushing what is essential about journalism. And so it's a balancing act for those of us who are hugely critical of the legacy press, where I don't want to see it wither and die at its core, but they seem to be doing everything in their power to make it so, which is strange.
When you say they, is it everyone or is it just...
It's not everyone, but institutionally I do think it is remarkable to see the herd mentality. A lot of it I think has to do with people, and this is not just on the left, but people being afraid of their audiences, just institutional capture in newsrooms. I mean, you have in some of these cases, and we've seen example after example, of the inmates running the asylum in newsrooms, right, where editors and executives are afraid of the younger generation of journalists who don't actually believe in journalism or free speech. They believe in an agenda. And as long as that mentality is ascendant, then we will see mainstream media just die.
And is that because partly they're terrified of losing their jobs, which is happening? So they'll do anything to keep their job?
I think they're terrified. Yes, and they're terrified of losing favor with their clique. And their clique, they get around and they congratulate each other and they give each other awards, even as the trust and the industry is crumbling beneath their feet. They go to fabulous places and congratulate one another about how great they are and standing up, truth to power, all these slogans that used to mean something and now just mean we're going to speak specific truths to specific power and then we will completely abandon the truth when it comes to anything else. It is a sinking ship. And whether it can be saved, I don't know. Whether it can be fixed comes to a question of whether they want to fix it. And I'm not sure many of them do.
Carine, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks to Steamboat.
Most importantly, yeah.
Thank you.
So listening to those two, are you in agreement or do you see opportunity for improvement?
Of course, I work at a legacy media outlet, so.
Right.
But
Me.
I'm a little more hopeful. One, because I work there. I think a lot comes down to the people you work with, and at least on the opinion page at the Boston Globe where I work, people are thirsty and hungry for different ideas. And to your point, I've actually been surprised by how much of our audience wants different ideas. And even if they don't want it, and they don't like what I'm saying, and they don't like a right-leaning perspective, well, they're still clicking on the pieces. So. We've seen the decline. I think we're still in the decline period of mainstream media, but look, there are reasons to be hopeful. Look at the Washington Post. I mean, who could have thought that what's going on at the Washington Post would ever happen? You're seeing more diversity of thought on especially opinion pages. I'm an example, but you can look, across all the Times and running not just new people and new voices, but new ideas that you never would have thought would have shown up. And it's a shame that we weren't able to have those national conversations before. To your point, Guy, it's too bad that news had become so moralized, but it doesn't surprise me because you have to think about the people going into newsrooms, not just opinion side, but also especially the news side. A lot of them are elite, educated. Their education was moralized. They were told that there is right and wrong and that you can't debate certain things. And then, of course, that seeped into the way that they were covering the news or even the stories that they covered. But I'm actually quite hopeful because, if anything, there's just an economic incentive to diversify the ideas in mainstream outlets.
I'm a little hopeful as well, partly because I think the Boston Globe actually employing you in the position that they do would have been unthinkable in 2020. Guy's been at it much longer than I, but I started my media career in about 2018. And in that period of 2018 to 2022-ish, maybe, well, even really 23, 24, the intolerance for different perspectives in mainstream media, any sort of perspective. I remember Kevin Williamson, the conservative longtime National Review writer, now he works at The Dispatch, was hired by The Atlantic specifically to bring a different perspective. And what they did was they took this guy who had spent decades writing, combed through everything he had ever written, every podcast interview he had ever done in conversation, found one clip they took out of context about a thought experiment discussing abortion, and used it to get The Atlantic to unhire him. And it worked. And so I think maybe it's just the decline in interest, maybe it's the brutal political reality slap that they've gotten, that Trump won and people are over this. But I see it changing a little bit. I mean, even CNN, as bleak as their ratings may be, right? The most popular show on CNN, or one of the most popular, is Newsnight, where they feature Scott Jennings, who is a MAGA Republican, every day, arguing with people and offering a real Republican perspective, not the Republican strategist that CNN in years past would put up there to just agree with Democrats. There is a yearning for this, and I think I am seeing some green sprouts, right, in mainstream media of things like this where they are opening up a little bit. Will it really last? I hope so, but I don't know.
Guy, how fragmented will it become, or does it have to become, before there is the reset?
Well, I think it is getting increasingly fragmented, which is good and bad, right? So I think you'll sometimes talk to old school journalists and they'll be pining for the good old days where it was 2 or 3 newspapers and the 3 networks and they decided what the news was, and that's the way it is, right? And that was good because they could top down just tell America what the truth was. And I don't think those are the good old days. I think those are the bad old days in a lot of ways. So I'm glad that we've moved on from that. There is a danger, though, when we have a huge explosion of different sources, which overall, on balance, I think is a good thing, where people can just craft and curate a little silo for themselves, where they only hear and read things that they already are predisposed to agree with, and they only hear cherry-picked, ridiculous nonsense from the other side that's being made fun of, where maybe you start to lose sight of certainly a common set of facts, but even what the other side might be arguing. And occasionally they have a point, occasionally, right? So I think it's good to know. I like to at least have a sense that I can persuadably play a leftist, right? Like I could show up on a panel like this on April Fool's Day or something, and we could have a debate, and I could at least give somewhat fair shake to what they believe. I don't think many people in the mainstream press and on the left can do that when it comes to us, because they've ghettoized our outlets and our thinking so much that it's icky, and therefore they don't want to even kind of grapple with it at all, and so they just shut it down. And I'll give an example. Before my radio show went national, for a number of years, I would do All Things Considered on NPR, and I'd fill in for David Brooks, and I was 4 to 5 notches to the right of David Brooks. So they weren't always getting people with my opinions on that show on NPR generally. And by the way, I'm glad they exist. I'm also glad I don't have to pay for them to exist anymore. I think that's a very good development. And on multiple occasions, I would go in and do this very prestigious NPR broadcast from a center-right perspective, and some producer or executive would come racing over to me afterwards with a horrified look on their face, sweating and saying, we might have to cut out your comments from the West Coast broadcast because you've said things without evidence and you've spread misinformation. Where did you get this? And I would simply Google the link that I had read earlier and say, this is what I'm talking about. and they would sort of read it and blink and sort of just walk away, and I guess they wouldn't cut out my comments, but they were just utterly unaware of what we are thinking and talking about on the right. And I think if we get more of that polarization on both sides, that's not a good thing for the country. So I think it's great I want all of us to have really good audiences and be successful, but I think it is important to diversify intellectually your news consumption habits, or else we end up in these different columns and almost have no way to relate to each other anymore, which I think is unhealthy.
But you're basically describing, the fragmentation you're describing is what outlets cover what stories. And it's true, just swaths of Americans see the news one way, others see it another way because of the news that they're consuming. But to me, this is actually a call to conservatives to lean into mainstream, and it creates a lot of opportunity. Just in my own personal work, there are stories that I cover that, I mean, sometimes I don't even have to share my opinion, even though that's my job. I can just cover a story, and that is a service to my readers because they had never really seen it from that perspective or even known that that was going on. So it's a great opportunity, and right now, especially since there is an appetite and even an economic incentive to bring in different opinions, I think that more conservatives should be considering going to these outlets where, that have traditionally leaned left.
Carine, what's the atmosphere in the newsroom in Boston Globe now about these kind of threats coming in? What is it like there? Are they threatened? Is it full of energy, or what's the kind of feel?
I've had an extremely positive experience, and I will say a lot of people warned me against going there. They were worried that I would either, people on the right were worried I'd be censored, that I wouldn't be able to express my beliefs. But this goes to another big issue that we haven't touched on. The quality of your editor and the leadership of your section really matters, and I feel that my editors have my back 100% and genuinely want different coverage on the page. I feel the same way about my colleagues, even though we disagree on the big issues. So, the institution that you work at and the people that are, your bosses really matter in this case. I feel completely safe to express my opinions, and there's a great culture with my colleagues as well. So it's been positive.
I remember being at Bloomberg, and when I started out as a kind of graduate intern, we had a rule of 5 Fs. They already know about this. So if you didn't hit the 5 Fs, first word, future word, final word, fastest word, and factual word. So to hit all the 5 Fs in a story is pretty difficult. And if you didn't hit the 5 Fs, it would be, Dawson, get here now. And everyone heard it. It was just so, not good. But I think, to your point, if you have good editors, that is absolutely so important. And I think there is a strong credibility they take it extremely seriously, like fact-based coverage. Who are your sources? I think, Bloomberg, to your point, also, a Boston Globe, there are mainstream legacy media out there that are doing that. I don't think everyone is bad, but I agree with you. There are enormous chinks in the armor.
But then I will say I'm a participant in the new media ecosystem, right? I'm a podcaster and social media content creator, but most people in that space are left and right are honestly not doing much of that. It is very much a Wild West. I regularly, and I cover this on my podcast.
Which is dangerous, Brad, isn't it?
It's
because
terrible.
Everyone's
it's
consuming.
terrifying. Yeah. People are convinced, millions upon millions of views on videos of things that are simply not happening. I encounter this on TikTok all the time. There was a whole news cycle on TikTok that it was here. Trump was reinstating segregation. Notice how that hasn't happened, right? It was actually an old Lyndon B. Johnson era executive order on affirmative action he had revoked. But obviously, Trump couldn't and didn't restore segregation. But millions of people genuinely believed this. And you can encounter this in far-right echo chambers as well. And it's only getting worse, unfortunately, with the rise of AI. I have older people dear to me who have come to me and said, "Did you see Barron Trump's wedding?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't." And they're like, "Oh yeah, I saw all about it on Facebook. I saw the pictures." I'm like, well, that would be strange because he's not married, and of course it's AI. Same thing. Did you see the video of Obama getting arrested? No, Grandma, I didn't actually. I feel like I would have seen that. She's like, yeah, I saw it all about it on YouTube. And I'm like, that's actually really frightening. And I don't know how we fix this because Obviously, the old way was so broken, and a handful of people had a monopoly on media and what people could consume, and I'm glad that monopoly is broken. But the Wild West we're in now in social media and new media is going to become a problem, if it hasn't already.
And if we had something of a functioning fact-checking system, that could perhaps be a solution, except the fact-checkers, self-appointed in the media, are sometimes the worst offenders of all. Right? You look at PolitiFact, which is basically the DNC. They'll occasionally, blind squirrel find a nut and get something right. But overall, like, they will take something that is true and figure out a way to call it mostly false if it's a Republican and vice versa. And so the referees that have at least raised their hands and put on the referee jersey, and you squint and it's just different shades of blue stripes, and it's like, okay, well, now we don't believe you either. And so there isn't really much of an authority that people can come together and trust on any of this stuff, which is, I think, part of this ongoing issue.
Is the big problem advertising revenue? Because it's all the kind of clickbait, I don't know, a Daily Mail, for example, has the most readership in the world, but all the advertising revenue is going there. So to change direction towards a mainstream media or any fact-checked won't sell news, it won't drive advertising. So he's smiling. So
well,
that's
the people online.
That's a major concern.
What you're describing, right? I mean, the most popular voices in online media, you have basically two extremes, but it is not the most sober and nuanced voices, right? It is the person, I'm in particular thinking of one person, like the MAGA podcaster who everything is going to be a insane woke attack on America just happened, and you click in and Cracker Barrel changed their logo, which is I don't like the new logo, to be clear, but it's like it's dialed up to a 10 out of 10. And then on the most popular left-wing stuff is something called the Midas Touch Network, which is like more resistance, more clickbait, anti-Trumpy than MSNBC. And that's where the traffic is going. So the same thing you just described is happening in digital media and new media as well.
How do you change direction on that?
It's the audiences. I'm sorry. The
That's the problem, right?
is the
Right.
people at some point. Because media is just a market, and like any market, it responds to demand. And the demand, unfortunately, in this country, is for confirmation of what you believe, and it is for entertainment rather than news. And that's a pretty universal phenomenon, and I just exist in that. So I play into it somewhat because you have to exist in this space. But until that demand changes and people vote with their attention, you are every time when you are scrolling, you are voting what you reward with your attention. So stop rage watching things, first of all. That's
Unless
one
it's
of the
us.
problems. Well, it's probably not us in this room, but I have a lot of people who rage watch me, and I'm like, you don't understand. You're literally paying my bills. Be more judicious about what you consume and reward and support the people who truly are doing that, like serious, fact-based work, rather than just, the most entertaining or extreme voice that's constantly trying to grab your attention.
Carine, how big a pressure is advertising revenue and just hitting those marks in the newsroom?
Well, I actually think this is why the health of mainstream media really matters, because these are big institutions that honestly do generate a lot of knowledge and do have a lot of resources, and they are not necessarily as pressured as, like a blogger or a Daily Mail style or whatever. So it's really, that's why we're having this conversation. It's extremely important that people can trust these these mainstream media sources. Also, that they adapt to the way that people are now consuming media. I think
which they've been slow to do.
They've been very slow to do, and they need a kick in the butt. But I think they'll eventually get there, especially because they have the resources. And that's where it's really going to matter. Who are the voices talking to people? How many different voices are you going to have? A lot of what we're trying to adapt to now at the Globe is not just, everyone's podcasting, but cutting clips from your podcast and making really engaging Instagram reels. We have such a talented, she just graduated from Northeastern a couple years ago, but she's doing our social media editing on Instagram, TikTok, extremely talented. And so having people that know how to do that is really important for the health of mainstream media as well.
So I do think that there can be a demand problem that we're talking about, what people are gravitating towards, what they're rewarding, yes. I think there is the chase of revenue, of course. It's a business, it's not a charity generally, although there's some people that endow things, that kind of thing. There is also just the gigantic systemic problem that these newsrooms are dominated by people who are ideologues. And they are willing to go down with the ship as long as they feel like they are helping their side and their team, which is something, but it's certainly not journalism. And I think the rise of almost unapologetic activism under the guise of journalism, while they look down their nose, certainly at people like us as just sort of those grubby opinion people, they are more biased in some ways than I am, and I hold my biases out for the public to see. And I think what alarms me is what we're seeing in the younger generations of journalists in newsrooms. So quickly, if you can indulge me, this quick story. When I was an undergraduate, so this was 20 years ago, I was at Northwestern at the journalism school there, which is one of the prestige programs in the country. And I remember distinctly one of the toughest professors, really well respected, a woman who happened to be a black woman. She came into class one day and she read the Daily Northwestern, our student newspaper, had put out an editorial. There had been a string of off-campus muggings that had really been a problem, crime, right around campus. And the Daily Northwestern editorial board, under pressure from activists on campus, wrote this editorial congratulating themselves that they were no longer going to publish descriptions of the suspects who were still at large because they perpetuated negative stereotypes. So this professor read the editorial. She said, "I think this is wonderful." She said, "Does anyone disagree?" I was like, oh. I raised my hand, and I had a big debate with her about this. And she said, "This isn't newsworthy." I said, "I think it is. These are criminals on the loose terrorizing the community. Knowing what they kind of look like would be helpful to maybe capturing them." And I remember asking her, if these were Asian women committing these muggings, would that be newsworthy? She said, yes. I said, ooh, why? And then she sort of panicked and realized that she was cornered and kind of melted down. And after class, she said, "Please stay after class. Mr. Benson, please stay after class." I was like, oh, here we go. And she thanked me. To her credit, she said, "Thank you for providing that perspective. You made some points. I think you got the better of me, actually." And the class benefited from that. I was like, okay, cool. But the decision that had been made at the Daily at the time was because certain activists sent a few emails and they changed their entire editorial policy as a result. Flash forward 20 years. Last year, there was an event at Northwestern where former Attorney General, it was either last year or the year before, Jeff Sessions, former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, was on campus, and a left-wing mob crashed the event, beat down the doors, and ended the event. They overwhelmed it. They had to whisk him away from security, and the whole thing stopped. It was just an egregious violation of free speech and everything that higher education is supposed to stand for. The Daily Northwestern had a bunch of reporters on the scene, reporting on it, taking pictures, quoting people, including the students who had done the storming. They were very proud of themselves. And the next day, the school started to investigate what had happened. The student activists went to their left-wing friends who run the school newspaper at the elite school and said, "We want you to take down every photo that you have. You're violating our privacy by taking photos of us doing something we're not allowed to do. And by the way, the on-the-record quotes we gave you, you need to get them offline. Take them down." And the student newspaper editors said, okay.
Oh my gosh. Shut it down.
That is the student newspaper at Northwestern. That is the next generation of journalists coming into these newsrooms. I don't know how we fix that.
But Guy just reminded me of something. I went to the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and I briefly worked at the student newspaper before I was fired, predictably. But I was formally disciplined during my time there, which, by the way, was volunteering. I was setting up the print paper, editing all these articles, doing all this stuff. It was not paid work because I had a colleague who identified as non-binary, and I don't think that's a thing. So I don't engage in that, but I also didn't want to be rude, so I would just use this person's name and I would try to avoid saying their I wasn't trying to start conflict. But one time, we were having a conversation, I made the mistake of referring to this person as the boy who cried wolf. Apparently, that was a microaggression, and I was formally written up and told that if it ever happened again, I would be fired. Those people dispersed who worked in that newsroom and now work at, a couple of them work at the Boston Globe, actually. Several of them work at CNN, several of them work at the Associated Press. So it's a pipeline problem. And the pipeline is tainted beyond repair and probably needs to be destroyed and a new one should be built.
Like that is taking a figure of speech and making it a hate crime. Think how insane that is. But that is truly what these newsrooms are in the grips. And you say, oh, well, those are just college kids. I go, wait till they get to the real world.
Not all newsrooms. Just to say that not every newsroom is like this.
Not yet, but
these are extreme stories.
But we're talking about campus newsrooms as well, and I think a lot of them are like that.
Just saying other newsrooms.
Sure, but you look at what the New York Times, some of the story,
Yeah,
the New York Times, the Washington Post, some of these newsroom stories. CBS had a meltdown.
Reuters, Bloomberg, my FT, Financial Times.
There are some that do
Boston
it better.
Globe.
I'm just worried that when we look at teenagers and college students and say, oh well, wait till they get to the real world. This won't fly. They are remaking the real world in some of these newsrooms, and it takes strong leadership to stand up to it. And where the strong leadership prevails, good. Yeah. Where it doesn't, disaster.
But I think it's really important to. This isn't necessarily intentional activism. Like, a lot of these stories sound terrible. I certainly have my horror stories from my time at the Crimson. With time, you look back and realize that this is the reality that these students have been presented. It's not just news stories that are moralized right and wrong. It is just knowledge. And I agree with you that it does start in the universities. It starts when you're applying to the universities. Basically, university applications, at least until now, prompted you to show how you are an activist, how you fight for what is right. And when you're looking at a university like Harvard, UMass Amherst, or whatever, what is right leans left. So you're already, before students enter the university, they are primed to believe that the right thing to do is always fight for the right thing, which just happens to be the progressive thing. And then they go on into their different industries. I mean, this doesn't just happen in newsrooms. Just look at HR departments and like major corporations across the country. It happened everywhere. The craze was everywhere. But in newsrooms in particular, it's dangerous because news should not be moralized. It is just news. It is just information. So I think that the answer does start in the universities, specifically the elite universities that are feeding kids to all of these top mainstream outlets. But again, like, it's not, with time I've realized it's not as, actually, it's almost more insidious that it's not intentional. Yeah. This is the reality that a lot of young people are getting.
With all of this as well, and to your point, Guy, why would you want to be a journalist if you're leaving school now? Because there's not as much incentive. I left in 95, obviously I was 2 years old, but for me it was a big deal. It was like huge, joining Bloomberg as a graduate intern, it was fantastic. Now, as we discussed earlier, there's just not as much incentive because you listen to all of this and you're thinking, why do I want to go in that space? AI is destroying this, jobs are being cut, legacy media is corrupt and biased in some cases. It's very hard to have what YouTube guys have got, YouTube channel. It's a challenge to bring up young journalists, I think. It's still a tough market, isn't it?
It is, but it's also still a wonderful job, and I mean,
no, I agree with
not
you,
exactly.
But not everyone is as entrepreneurial as you two.
It's not for the weak.
To build it, right? Because you're going to get hate, you're going to get counseling, all these things. You've got to push through.
You have very thick skin and just not care.
But how many journalists have got that?
Not many, no. So
and you've got to get paid during all this.
It's kind of bleak. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily to somebody,
which is what worries me.
Except the kind of person that will have it not recommended to them and do it anyway will probably be the one that will persevere in the long run. I was told to go to law school and just make more money and do something else, and I'm like, but this is more fun.
There's still time. I'm going to get to the questions because there's some really good questions. I've got so many questions. Do you think, question to Guy, that social media algorithms, which are made to be extremely addictive, contribute to the overall spread of misinformation and division? How can we combat this climbing issue to help younger thinkers in the world of politics? It's a great question.
Yes, unequivocally yes, it's happening. Part of the reason that you mentioned TikTok, which technically should be illegal right now in the country, but we're just kind of ignoring that law for some reason, for political reasons actually, but I think with TikTok specifically, a lot of the discourse around it is concerns about espionage and them having access to our phones and our data, them being the Chinese Communist Party, of course. That is absolutely true and completely valid as a concern. To me, perhaps the greater concern is not what they're taking out of our phones, but what they are putting onto the screens of American youth, right? They control, if you have let's call it what it is, effectively an enemy regime that is controlling the algorithm of the most popular search engine in the United States of America, overwhelmingly for young people, seems like a very serious national security threat. Because if they, I mean, look at what's happening with Israel and Hamas and the opinions of young people on that issue. I think a lot of that is driven by social media algorithms and what gets boosted and what gets suppressed. And if they're able, if the CCP and others, and they have very happy enablers in this, in the West as well, if they're willing to tweak things here and there right now under these circumstances, God forbid we ever end up in any potential conflict with China. I mean, all bets are off. They can control, from a propaganda perspective, the #1 source of information for young Americans, which seems alarming to me personally. So that is definitely a huge issue. I think the counterpoint is you can throw up your hands. I think in the case of TikTok, it absolutely should be banned or American owned, which is, as I said, the law. But then you have other social media outlets. So, I think with Elon Musk and X, he tried to sort of counterweight it a little bit. It's definitely not perfect. And they've had some big bugs in that system, but at least they've tried to amplify and have other types of things trending that aren't necessarily the other places. But along with AI, I think it's one of these monumental challenges. And when you're a single person trying to tell the truth and to be intellectually honest, and then you see what you're up against, it can be daunting and demoralizing. But I think all I can do is use my platform as responsibly as possible. And I'm not perfect, but I try to be good, or at least better than most. So I can control what I do. And some of these bigger issues, I think it's important to raise the concerns, be clear-eyed about them, and speak the truth. That's the best tool that I personally have.
But if you're hooked on something, you're not going to listen so much. You're going to hear it, but you won't listen.
Or you might not even hear it at all.
Governments around the world are being irresponsible, like UK, US. No one's dealing with this. It's a major
I actually think
disease.
You mentioned AI
addiction.
briefly. I think the solution or worsening of the problem will come in the form of AI, because what is already happening and is what is going to happen is a young person is going to see something on TikTok and say, "Chat, is this true?" to their Chat GPT. And if we can make sure those algorithms are actually even anything close to resembling neutral, so just not like totally skewed to the left, because the people building them and designing them and the companies do lean left. As much as some high-profile figures in Silicon Valley have kind of gone right-wing recently, that is still not the underlying dynamic of big tech. And we've already seen issues with some of these algorithms or LLMs be like making kind of ridiculous fact checks and other things. We really have to fight. Maybe there needs to even be maybe Grok can be this, I don't know, but like a different version of it. That is going to be, we talk about, PolitiFact is already fading into irrelevance. Mm-hmm. It will be the AIs, will be the fact checkers of the future. People at some point will see enough things told to them on their phone are happening that aren't actually true, I hope, and they can and already will use AI to check things. So we have to fight for what's input into the AI. AI that we have it now is not actually a thinking person. It is a super, super high-tech search engine that pulls stuff together and puts together a response like a calculator, and we have to be making sure that what's going into it is not totally skewed. Because if it is, we're cooked.
Carine, how realistic is that to actually?
I mean, I think it sounds nice, but I think media has always been biased. Every single outlet has always been biased, and the right has almost elevated mainstream media as a fixation of frustration, when it is always, every single outlet has always had its biases. It has just sort of become this target. And so, I also assume that going forward, whatever algorithm you're using is going to be biased one way or another. I find it very hard to believe that we'll ever have like one objective, or maybe there will be one objective source, but I find it hard to believe that everyone will trust that one source. What I think would be helpful, and this is also idealistic, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, but young children they're the ones like now consuming all of this news, and they know how to do it very well. They know how to use TikTok better than all of us probably. They know how to scroll reels and all of this. The same way that we were taught, in the school library about plagiarism and all of these things, children need to be sat down and we need to level with them and be honest that everything you read is biased. There will never be a non-biased source that you're reading. So here's how to figure out what kind of bias it is. Now, of course, you could throw up your hands and say, well, the teachers' colleges are Marxist bastions. In a lot of cases, that's true. But, I think like no effort has been put into showing children how to be fair-minded in what they are reading, and I think that's hugely important.
Yeah, I think like basic truth literacy and basic civic literacy would
Yes.
go a long way. And the problem is, who do you entrust to actually, so if we're talking about potential regulation of AI, who's doing the regulating? Institutional trust problem. And if we're talking about, in a good way, indoctrinating or inculcating in young kids an ability to sort of separate fact from fiction and thinking critically, who's doing that teaching? Another institutional trust problem. So the institutional trust problem that we're dealing with and talking about here in the media is compounded by the institutional trust problems that are richly earned again in the government sector and the education sector as well, and sometimes it's both, obviously.
But I do have a little hope because also, I mean, look how well the Trump campaign used social media in this election. I mean, like, look how successful that was. I covered young men on the campaign trail and their shift to the right. Hugely successful. So the left also has an incentive to teach young kids how to, figure out social media. And that's going to be a priority for them too. Because finally, like, conservatives and the right are catching up on, using social media very well. Traditionally, it was the left that dominated, but now conservatives are sort of dominating.
On that point, Carine, one question. What is your opinion on AI regulation and regulation online in general?
Oof, that is
Question from the audience.
not my beat, but I think earlier you were talking
How important
about,
is it? How important is it?
I mean,
Put it that
it's
way.
hugely important, but again, like I am always going to assume that first of all, I think guidelines are going to be constricting. So any type of AI guidelines, one, constrictive, but also they'll never keep up with AI. Government never keeps up with anything, so I don't trust it to be able to keep up with the innovation in AI. My answer is the same as with the way we're dealing with media. People need to be properly educated, and the audience users need to be responsible in how they use these tools.
I think with AI regulation, a couple key components. One, deep distrust of the regulators is warranted, both because the people running the day by day in federal agencies have a political perspective, and two, the people writing the laws are on the elderly side, shall we say, and don't understand, many of them, there are actually many senators and congressmen who do not know how to use email, and their aides actually do that for them. So the idea that they're going to save the day on AI is something I'm deeply skeptical of. The other thing is that we have to understand is China is not going to hold back their AI development, so we want to win. And then I think we have to regulate harms that occur, not regulate potential harms. A lot of what I see is like, well, this bad thing could happen and could happen and could happen, so we need to complete pause on AI development for 12 months or whatever. China's not going to be pausing anything, right? So you want to keep up or fall behind are the options. And so I would say a light touch, obviously it's probably not going to be totally unregulated, a light touch regulatory model for AI also is important. And then focusing on regulating problems that emerge, do not get bogged down in the regulating every bad thing that could happen, which is, what a lot of people do to kind of push this big regulatory red tape state.
Well, and the problem fundamentally with regulation in this sector and in this realm is how many, and we could probably go around the room and we could list off multiple high-profile examples from the last 4 to 5 years of misinformation that turned out to simply be information that they regulated and blocked and censored. Right? So that's part of the problem too, where people don't trust the regulators because they have regulated things and they've been wrong repeatedly for ideological reasons. So I'm sort of like the fly in the ointment here, like constantly bringing up the negativity, but I think the negativity has to be grappled with because it's not like, theoretically this could be a problem. We've seen it for the last half decade. All of the potential pitfalls of doing more of this sort of thing in the future have been illustrated in stark relief over and over again. And then they say, okay, I guess you were all right about Joe Biden's decline. Never mind, let's write some books, make some money, give each other awards, make, and it's going to be out in paperback next year, all of that. And we're sorry, maybe the right had a point. And then the next chance they have, when the stakes are high again, to course correct, they go right back to the old way of thinking because they can't help themselves. So that's my cynicism coming back, but it has a habit of doing that these days.
There's There is one existing harm that I still don't think the government is able to regulate effectively, because what would happen is we would do it and China wouldn't. But some type of tool to be able to consistently tell transparency, like was AI, especially with deep fakes, is this a deep fake? Is this something I can trust? Is this something that Brad's grandma can actually believe, But that I think will also come from the private sector. I think like a lot of the solutions to the problem in AI are going to just be derived from innovation, and the government
and
will be
competition.
and
we can't let the few incumbents pull up the ladder behind them. And yeah, now you know who wants regulation? Actually, Sam Altman, founder of one
Is
of.
he there?
Yeah, he has lobbied.
I think
for,
there's too much power in his hands.
Yeah,
Zuckerberg's.
And he has
those are the
lobbied.
bounty hunters of the Wild West.
But he
Right?
wants to draw the bridge up after he's crossed it and stop the competition through this. He has gone and testified before Congress asking them to regulate AI more heavily. And that's deeply suspect when incumbent businesses want to be regulated.
How do you
more.
manage those guys?
Oh boy.
can't.
I think competition is the best.
They are the greatest danger, aren't they?
Well,
Don't you
and the
think?
greatest promise.
They
I
have
mean,
the
they are
most
on the
power.
cutting edge of innovative technology that could change everything and solve so many problems and create cures and discover combinations for medications and do all sorts of wondrous things we never thought imaginable. But of course, with great promise comes tremendous peril.
You had a very good idea on the call we had, on the kind of Zoom call on Monday, about trying to, through AI, having a tool so we know what trusted news, trusted sources. So how far away are we from that? Having an AI tool that whoever it is can go to, that's guaranteed to be factually correct.
Well, I think we are far away from it.
That would be a
not
great
because,
idea.
Yes, but we're far away from it not because of the technology. The technology is almost there. We're far away because of the institutional trust issues, which I don't have the answers to
Or the
solve.
incentive? Is
And
there incentive for
I
it?
actually think there would be enough demand for that, like a general, actual, neutral fact-check AI. I think as much as people do like demand, a confirmation bias, enough people would use that for that to exist.
Who would use that in this room?
I think most people
An AI.
probably would.
Right.
Well, most people, they might just not want to use AI, which is
Right.
fair. But
Yeah, fair.
By the way, one thing, bring it back to like the news
Yep.
media, one thing that might be useful, and I think one of the frustrations that we have collectively when it comes to institutional distrust is a constant ubiquitous lack of accountability.
Yeah.
When people are caught doing something wrong or dishonest and then just nothing happens to them and they just move on to the next thing, that is very frustrating, and I think it erodes the trust even further. So one thing I would like to see, and it's like a little small, like old school journalism thing, but if you're a journalist and a source lies to you and you've given that source anonymity, you should blow the source. Like we saw this with all the stuff they were going after Trump. There were a lot of people selling journalists a bill of goods, and then memos and emails would come out showing, and it's not even just about Trump, you could talk about any different number of stories showing like, oh, that person was lying. That person was rewarded, that person was bestowed upon that person was anonymity for whatever reason. If they are then abusing that anonymity to misinform the public, then I think journalists need to start naming those people and then not using them as sources again.
Agreed.
Right? So I think there needs to be accountability, and some of that comes down to journalists actually doing old school things and saying, if you lie to me, I'm gonna blow you up publicly.
But I think audiences also have to hold the people that they listen to accountable.
Yes.
I'll give you a good
Yes.
example of this. When President Trump made his pretty limited targeted strikes on Iran, I didn't say anything about it because I don't know much about that, frankly. But a bunch of very high-profile pundits had warned, if Trump strikes Iran, World War III, nuclear holocaust, very explicit terms. None of it came true. And then they just moved on to posting their content the next day, and their numbers, their audiences did not dip. So if they don't face a audience or reputation, and that's just one example of many.
It's a big one, though.
Yeah,
it's a big one. Trump, so I covered that story very closely. I was very supportive of Trump's action for all sorts of reasons. I think it is one of the best decisions he has made as president in either term, phenomenal in my opinion. But he had these people chirping, certainly on the left and some on the right, saying, if he does this, they put their credibility on the line. Very specific bullet points. These things will happen. 30,000 Americans will be dead within a month. Crazy stuff.
None of it happened.
None of it happened.
Right.
And I think then if you listen to someone, and part of this is the audience trusting people, if you see someone either lying to you or constantly getting giant things wrong over and over again with no acknowledgement, no apology, then it's up to you to say, I am not going to put as much trust in that person anymore. I'm not going to click on that person as much anymore, thus rewarding this. So some of this is done at the institutional level that we're concerned about. Some of it comes down to, frankly, a grassroots level of news consumers, for lack of a better term, punishing people for doing the wrong thing. An old-fashioned value that I think has great value, actually.
I agree.
To your sources point, I think to your point, Carine, having a good editor in the newsroom is so important for that. Because for me, an editor would always say, that's one source, John, I want 2 more sources, right? So otherwise that story doesn't fly, right? That happens at Boston Globe. So a good editorial system, who are honest and on your back all the time, you don't make those mistakes. And at Bloomberg, on The Wire, if you did, you put out what we hated, NI correct was the thing. And that being on that, with the correct in the kind of brackets, was the worst thing that day. Because you are so beaten up by everybody. So I think there's that kind of accountability. There's a question, I'm looking at time, but there's a great question here. As a journalist, what are your thoughts on President Trump accusing many mainstream media outlets of being fake news? Are these accusations scaring young adults away from legacy news and turning to social media for their news?
So I'll just hop in quickly to say, I don't care that Trump insults the news media. I think it's his right to criticize them, free speech. I would not use the probably extreme language that he uses, enemy of the people, but that he has every right to. I will say that I'm deeply disturbed when he takes retaliatory action against press outlets.
Like banning from the White House.
Right, when the Associated Press doesn't want to use the name Gulf of America, which I think is funny, I like it, but they say we're going to still say Gulf of Mexico, and he kicks them out of the White House. That is the government retaliating against the press because it doesn't like what they're saying. That, I think, is inconsistent with free speech values and freedom of the press values. So I would say that criticize them as much as you want. Your criticisms are clearly resonating, but do not retaliate using the trust and authority bestowed to you through the government against the press. I think that's totally unacceptable.
And if you would hate it if a Democrat did it, then don't do it.
Right, sorry, just to add on that, because I'm very passionate about this, the same logic Trump uses to kick AP out of the White House could be used to kick Fox, Newsmax, whatever, out of the White House because they won't use a future Democratic official's preferred pronouns. Seriously, 1,000% the same logic. And if you don't want that, don't do this.
One thing that I also, and some of this is stylistic, like you're not going to change Donald Trump, okay? He is what he is, for better and for worse. It's just, that's the guy. And he'll be in a press conference or whatever, and it's not always what I prefer to see, right? A journalist will ask, even a bad question, he'll be like, you're a disgrace to your industry and your mother's a whore, right? Like, that's what he'll do. I personally prefer what we see, the scalpel of a J.D. Vance or a Marco Rubio against Margaret Brennan, for example. One comes to mind, where they go on, and it's not like ad hominem attacks, but they know their stuff cold, and they run circles around some of these journalists. Because not all these journalists, I'm not talking about her specifically necessarily, but not all of them are terribly bright, and a lot of them they're lazy, they don't know our side of the argument on a lot of things, our side collectively. So I prefer to see political leaders and figures that I respect marshal their knowledge and embarrass them with an overwhelming use of facts rather than the insults. But Trump is Trump, and like the guy's a billionaire who's been elected president twice. So I'm not going to really lecture him about if he's doing it the right or the wrong way because he's had some success. But we can always hope. We can always hope for better.
Carine?
But I agree with your point. I mean, this is the same thing we're seeing with higher education, where the frustrations are absolutely valid. The execution goes a little too far. And often it's too broad. Like, there are outlets that really, at least this time around, really tried to cover him better, tried to give his supporters voice, again, because there was an economic incentive to do so, because people genuinely knew that something was missing. I mean, I spent my assignment from the New Hampshire primary until the election was just to spend time with Trump voters. That's all I did. And all I did was basically give them a voice. I called it translating Trump for, basically the whole year. But that was my job. So there's an interest, and there's also an appetite. I mean, like, a lot of my most liberal readers emailed me after the election to thank me because they were not blindsided. A lot of other people were blindsided. So I think, like, things will come around because now the incentive is being applied.
Yeah, and the translation is the perfect term, because for a lot of people in newsrooms, Trump voters like basically speak Swahili as far as they're concerned. Like it's just they cannot understand it, and they need credible people who can do that and make sense of it, which is why I think your role is so essential there at that place specifically.
2 minutes to go. I've got a question here. Two questions, final. Can the panelists name people in the mainstream media that they respect and trust and see as role models? Question from the audience. So I'm going to finish with one from each, and also, what one step would you recommend to fix the mainstream media crisis? So first, a mainstream media person that you like or respect, and then a fix.
I mean, there's a number. I try not to go outlet by outlet. I try to go person by person.
Okay.
I see a byline. I say, okay, that's someone who might be more credible than someone else. I do think someone like a Barry Weiss, I have disagreements with her. She was very much part of that mainstream milieu, and she has left. I think she has started this new project in the Free Press that I don't always agree with, and they have a point of view, but I think it shows you can be honest and do journalism in sort of a transparent and open way. So I have a lot of respect for her. And I think I would just reference back to what I said in terms of, we can do what we do because we're in the industry. A lot of it will be driven from the ground up of people making different choices in their media consumption habits. It has to be both. It can't be done with just one or the other. It has to be both to at least get us to a slightly better place, which seems like a modest goal.
And this is a sort of a callback to my suggestion that more conservatives go into mainstream media. But somebody I just deeply respect and has become a really important mentor is Jeff Jacoby, who is a columnist, a conservative columnist at the Boston Globe. I think he's been there for over 30 years, through thick and thin, and it certainly hasn't been easy for him at times. So he's somebody that we don't always agree on things, but having him there made it possible for me to go there. I mean, I would have maybe been too, knowing that somebody like him could thrive in a mainstream media outlet made it possible for me, and I hope that, me being there makes it possible for others to follow. He's somebody that I really respect, and he also fundamentally believes that, there's a space, and arguably it's the most important space to be presenting free market ideas, conservative ideas, because it's where it's, these audiences are where it's needed most. And then what was the second question? Fix. Oh, yes.
One fix.
Yes, one fix. More, I don't know if people have read The Main Wire, but more like hyper-local independent news sources, because
local, we didn't even mention local, sorry, but time's out again. Carry on.
Yeah, so, and
good point, Carine.
Yeah.
I would say the two people that I would actually admire, I share the politics of neither of them all that much, but it would be Jessica Tarlov of Fox News and Scott Jennings of CNN, because they both take their ideas into the lion's den and then argue with them and they both come, say what you want, they both come prepared.
Yeah.
They do not shy away from the confrontation. I think we need more of that.
And I heard the ooh in the crowd. Jessica is a friend. She's a really good person. She's wrong on 85% of things, but she's a good person doing her best in a tough environment. I have a lot of respect for her as well.
Yeah.
I'd have been to interrupt, but I agree with you on the regional. I'm going to say Max Hastings was a brilliant historian, writes The Times on Sunday in the UK. He's a fantastic journalist, source-based, fact-checked. So Max Hastings for me. But thank you very much indeed, Guy, Carine, and Brad.